thing, of course, is that I am supposed to sort of find out if you have learned some things. And the way we do that, the very ineffective way to do that, is to give you an exam. I would be happy not to do that, but it's, there's a tendency in the university to find that unsatisfactory, just to give out points. Much nicer. So there's a written exam, and it's next week. I apologize again for the terrible date, but it's just the way it is. There are 7 questions with sub-questions, so 1A, B, 2A, B, C, things like that. The number of points awarded for these questions and sub-questions are in the exam. And these are what we call essay questions. So there's a question, you write a few sentences to answer the question. Keyword, concise. Some of you have a tendency to sort of write down as much as you know, and that is fine, as long as it is a straight answer to the question. You don't write full papers, A4, handwritten, badly written, illegible, in the hope that you write something down that has some connection with the question. Don't do that. I get cranky when I have to read that. So try to be concise, and most questions are typically, you have bullet lists. So always scan questions for things like, name at least 3, give 4 examples, and make bullets then. It makes it much easier to read. So this is the advice. Obviously, show what you know, but stick to the question. And the ideal examination would be just, okay, just sit down for 3 hours and write down what you have learned. That would be nice. It would be incredibly difficult to sort of grade that, but that would be nice. And well, we could have a conversation with each and every one of you, and have an oral examination, and just find out what you have learned. But it's not very efficient. So this is what it is. But this ideal, I try to translate in, well, more or less closed questions that you are allowed to answer. And other word of advice, if you read the question and you think, what on earth is he trying to find out here? Write that down. Or write down what you think should be the answer, and then give the answer. Because sometimes I write down a question and I expect a certain answer, and then when grading the exam, I find, oh, some of you, most of you, have misunderstood what I meant and written down something completely different. And when half of you do that, then it's very clear, and I try to award points for what is a meaningful answer. But to be on the safe side, if you are in doubt what I mean, write that down and continue with the answer. And you have 3 hours, and that should be more than enough.
Will you give a reference to particular names in your questions? So, for example, what did Hofstede and his partner,
Yes.
whatever, explain as?
I sometimes raise questions where I specifically refer to pieces of the literature.
Okay.
So explain this and that with respect to what is written in this and that article, chapter. Not all questions, but some of them. So when I raise a question about altruism, I use the names Speer and Schmidt.
Okay.
Which make perfect sense.
But I presume that as long as we know what is meant by altruism, we won't really have to worry about the names.
Exactly.
So, okay.
So if you have a clear concept of what altruism is, it shouldn't be a problem that you don't know the names.
Okay.
Or that you haven't written every syllable in that particular chapter. Other question there?
Oh no, I was wondering if you, when you state the question, that you write down the subject and names, or do you have to memorize the names of the articles?
Well, there's an example question from one of the exams 2 years ago. So this was a real question in the resit exam of 2 years ago. So explain the situation, you want to change some things, and I give you the tool that is used to analyze this change beforehand. This Broughton-Cronbach-Glaser formula. And then, well, it's really helpful then if you can write it down. That's not the question, but it's really helpful to answer the questions when you can write that down. Explain which cost and benefits are mentioned.
I don't understand this question. Which was the benefit?
So you introduce a new pay system. You expect beneficial effects. Those are benefits. And these benefits are related to the number of people you treat and how big the effects are and the spread of the effect and stuff like that. That's what you write down under A, on the benefit side. And of course, when I ask things about cost and benefit, it is very convenient for yourself, but also for me, to make that into a table with two columns, a column with cost and a column with benefits. It makes it very clear to me that you have understood what is asked. It's very legible for me, so it's easier to award points if you give correct answers. And then question B is this crucial element, and this standard deviation variable that I've talked about in some detail. So, if I ask to explain what is the crucial element, I want to first identify the crucial element, which is the standard deviation. And then, again, it is easy if you can just write down from the top of your head this formula. And then you have to explain why this is crucial. And that's, well, not trivial. That's more or less a difficult question. But if you have any in the lectures, I think I've tried to explain why I think it's crucial.
So if I understand correctly, one of the things is that the standard deviation that can indicate the reliability, or not only.
Yeah. So the idea is that you have an estimate of the effect, which is this size, and the standard deviation is relatively small. You have a different situation from when the standard deviation is really large. Especially when zero effect is here, the chances here are that you will get negative effects even, or this very large spread around the estimate of the effect. So this is why it is crucial to have some idea about the standard deviation, because otherwise you make terrible mistakes in this cost-benefit analysis. That is the problem.
So if I understand correctly, if the standard deviation is too high, then there's less of a chance that you'll actually get a return on the investment.
Exactly. And you can accept a very large standard deviation if the estimated effect is really large, of course. So it's not any large standard deviation don't do it. No, if the standard deviation is large, you also need a large estimated effect.
So
because then still it's very likely that the effect will be positive.
So it's crucial for the sake of an informed decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I may ask, would you mind to mention any of the other benefits, any other benefits to the SD?
Oh, that depends on what you're trying to do.
Oh, okay.
If you want to, so the benefits depend on what your goal was when introducing a new HR practice or introducing a new CMB system.
Mm-hmm.
If you introduce pay for performance to increase productivity, then your measure of benefit should be somewhere in productivity.
Mm-hmm.
When your goal is to reduce turnover costs and to enhance retention, then your benefits are there.
Oh, okay.
So it's really a very versatile tool to analyze different elements of your HR practice. And depending on the specific goal you have with changing things in either CMB or other areas of HRM, decides what the benefits are and what the costs are.
Mm-hmm.
So when the intervention is training, then cost is really clear. When you introduce pay for performance, then costs are somewhat less clear. It might involve some additional monitoring of quality, for instance, that are costs related to introduction of pay for performance system. But these are the things that you are, well, requested to sort of reflect on in a very concise manner. Yes?
If, for example, I know 3-5 methods to estimate standard deviation, should I write it, or it's not direct answer to the question?
No, I wouldn't bother in general with technical details of these methods, unless I specifically ask for it, and I promise I won't. So that's where the conciseness ends.
But
So
I mean,
don't do
not
statistical
additional
detail.
points for that. Not additional points for that. Like, I mean,
No.
to make it sure that it's complete.
No. You make it easier probably for me to award you full points straight away because I see ticks all the boxes and does some things that I don't even expect. So if these questions is 10 points in total, I write down 10 points in the sideline and then I go on. Because I see you give the correct answer, I see you do even more, so I don't even bother to read whether the answers are really correct and should I subtract 1 point. So it helps to be on the safe side, but don't go overboard because. Okay.
But sir,
Yes.
but, I'm not sure if you want to give the answer for these questions, but it's not perfectly clear yet.
I've given you, well, a serious amount of
I
pointers.
can see with the standard deviation, but on the first part, I'm not sure yet.
Well, these are, and you can look that up, the cost of introducing a change in your CMB system, for instance. You can sort of, and think about it, and it could be that back in those days I had a slide with where specifically asked. So this question is not coming back, obviously. Hopefully. But it is, and it's perfectly acceptable to do common sense, as long as you stick to answering questions about cost. And I gave the idea if you introduce pay for performance, and in the Lazier paper on the windshield company, they didn't just do that, but they also introduced this relatively elaborate peer review quality system, which also comes with costs. So you need to reorganize. So these are the things that you have to think about. And in that sense, it's a difficult question because it's not really specific. And depending on which example I give, in this case I didn't give an example, so you have to think about generic costs and generic benefits. But if it's easier for you, then you think about one specific intervention and then do the cost. But that would be a solution, I think. And it would be acceptable.
Should we describe this case if we think about something specific?
Well, if you think I'm in trouble if I want to write down generic things, I will answer this question using a specific example, and I use this specific example. Perfectly absurd. So I'm very, I welcome flexible answers as long as they are answers to the question. So not just start writing the stuff that you happen to know because you read it in the morning before the exam. Write down things that are meaningful for the question. But then the answer that I have in my head when I write down this question is not the only correct one. I try to be fair. Okay. Last year questions. So some of you actually read the stuff that is on the reading list, and then they run into this quasi-Maximin model, and people tend to think it's very complicated. I can understand it. I think that's complicated too. The conclusion for me is that I won't bother you with this in the exam. But if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty of the quasi-Maximin model, here's a reference. So it's this very elaborate notion of how you respond to other players in the game, other colleagues, competitors, and when you have certain expectations about their behavior. And to what extent you can accept that some of your efforts leads to benefits of others. So it's a very complicated notion of altruism, so to speak, and it's a very stylized, very model-oriented, very formalized way of thinking about that. And this is not the course to fully understand all the details and all the game theoretical details of that approach. The main message from this whole extended piece by Fearn Schmidt: people do not behave rational all the time. And that's probably sufficient to get at least to the required level of 6. Because it's not the only topic in the exam. Okay.
Can I ask about literature?
Yes?
Just, yesterday I tried to read this article by Lazar, I think about window installers.
Yeah?
And it's so boring, I got to sleep like 3 times and didn't get it at all. Like finally spent 3 hours, didn't get what's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read a chapter in another point of literature. The chapter, it was a small abstract, a small chapter about this article, and I understand everything.